Diana is an evolutionary psychologist and associate. We're here to talk about feminism, and we don't have much time. We're going to talk about the future of it. So we're just going to get into it. I'm going to announce and introduce all of my guests. First, we have Diana Fleischman. Give her a round of applause.
I'm kind of loud.
Diana is an evolutionary psychologist and associate professor and contributor to Aporia magazine. And next up, Mary Harrington. She's got fans. Mary is a contributing editor at Unheard and author of Feminism Against Progress.
Wait, what?
Give her a round of applause. I felt like that deserved a big applause. We have Kathleen Stock up next. She is a former philosophy professor, now contributing writer at Unheard and author of Material Girls, Why Reality Matters for Feminism.
What are these names?
And Anna Katya.
Yay!
She wanted me to introduce her as a podcaster in New York. Some of you might know of her.
She's funny.
So before we talk about the future of feminism, I really wanted to get a sense of where everybody on the panel feels about where feminism is now. So Diana, why don't you start us off and tell us your thoughts on where are we at with feminism at this moment?
So it's wonderful that men and women have choices to be more gender typical or less gender typical. They can choose gender atypical professions. There is less exclusion for men and women in various different roles, and there's a lot of freedom right now. But I also think that with that freedom, we have decided that whether you're male or female is not a good indicator of what you're going to like most in life. And what we know from research is that women who choose to have family or prioritize hobbies or prioritize taking care of their well-being over work tend to be happier, whereas men tend to be more status seeking. And so when everybody is out in the world trying to figure out their own way without the guidance of gender roles, they often muddle around for a long time before they figure out what's actually going to make them happy. And so I think that, whether you're male or female is actually a good heuristic as to what is going to be the most fulfilling for you in life. And we've sort of discarded that with the greater freedom that we have now.
Mary, your thoughts?
I think probably before you answer that question, you have to ask which feminism and where, in the sense that...
Okay, this used to annoy me when they would say this. It used to annoy me, and now I kind of get it. It's like... it represents their nuance. But originally, I used to find it really annoying because I'm like, oh, here you go. You can't define your club.
The challenge we face at the moment is that on the feminism which has taken center stage, if you like, or has become dominant, is one which is both anti-materialist in the sense that it wants to believe that the flesh, that the body, that physicality doesn't matter. And it's also universalist in the sense that it claims that this can be true for everyone. And I think if you look around the developed world, say here in New York City, you look around the wealthier section of women in New York City, that may well be true for them. Is it true for working class women in rural Greece, for example? I suspect not. Is it true for women living in hand to mouth in a subsistence agriculture community in Africa? I think probably not. Under other circumstances, the body matters more, physicality matters more, materiality matters more. And under those circumstances, the same policy which might be liberating for a woman in New York City might actually be...
Oh my God, Mary Carrington. Is that her name? Just spit it out.
be more immiserating in other conditions. So I would say if we're going to talk about where we're at right now, we probably need to define, we're talking about the feminism of wealthy white women in New York City. And where that's at right now, I'd say is in an anti-material place which is fundamentally at odds.
Not well is where we're at. Like, God damn.
With the interests of the majority of women in the world.
Okay. Kathleen?
Well, I think feminism has taken some terrible wrong turns, undoubtedly, in the last 30 years at least. The most obvious one, it's dematerialized womanhood. It's forgotten who the hell it was supposed to be talking about. It's also become, as I think Mary just indicated, a kind of hobby for elites to pursue their own private interests, and it's lost touch with like the most important and pressing things facing the most oppressed women in the world. So it's like microaggressions and all that crap. But fundamentally, men and women are different. And I do still think that women can't rely on men to decide their interests for them. So I'm not going to give up on feminism. I'm still...
My favorite feminist trope is a man is not a financial plan. I don't know why that one didn't stick, but it should.
In the game, I just have a lot of critical. I'm a critical friend of feminists. Let's just say so.
Anna?
She's funny.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm glad this is a panel and not a debate, so we can all drop the pretense of disagreement. Since as women, we're all going to passive-aggressively agree with each other anyway. I think modern feminism realistically has two main problems that we have to grapple with before we even address any kind of future for feminism. And the first is that when you remove any sort of, I guess, cultural constraints or social guardrails that originally governed relations between the sexes and kept them sort of separate, what ends up happening is that I feel like the innate biological differences between men and women become that much more obvious, and they become harder to ignore. And feminism really has no answer for this question because it goes against the kind of core tenet of progressivism in general, which like feminism is a subset of, that reality is a social construct, right? And so what feminism always ends up doing throughout time, throughout history, is like doubling down on blaming men, blaming patriarchy, blaming society. And then so I was thinking about this actually when we were doing our preparation for the panel, because we were all in the email thread commiserating about how it's so hard to get organized and how you don't really want to work when you have kids because you want to stay at home with them. And so is that like a sign that there's more work to be done for feminism? The work isn't over. Or is it a sign that the success of feminism has fundamentally, again, enhanced, attenuated certain innate biological differences? And then the second problem is related, and it's a question of what we call like agency. So I think the eternal feminist question throughout time is, how much agency do women really have? I would say the real question we should be asking is, how much agency do women really want? Because agency implies responsibility even for like unwanted, unforeseen, suboptimal outcomes. And I feel like right now we're stuck in this very unsatisfying stalemate where women want freedom, total unlimited freedom, up until the point that it stops working for them and something bad happens or they live to regret it, and then it comes back to blaming men, the patriarchy again. I really hate making this argument because I sound like such a misogynist, but I'm really not interested in defending men per se, though I think feminism has contributed to a crisis of masculinity too. But to make the point that like in the developed Western world, patriarchy effectively doesn't exist anymore. So we need like new targets and new goalposts.
Great. Thank you.
like her.
Thank you all. Diane and I were breastfeeding. We were pumping together.
We're breastfeeding each other.
Breastfeeding each other.
Works much better than a pump.
It got weird. It's Diana. So we were actually both pumping while we were kind of getting ready for the panel because I'm still breastfeeding, she's breastfeeding. And we were talking, I was like, nothing has made me less of a feminist than having a child. Because I'm just like, I just want to be home with my baby.
This is a really important thing that she's about to say. I touched on it for a minute, like in a video recently, but pay attention because it's important.
What am I even doing? How do you feel but on the other hand, I want all of the opportunity for my daughter. So it's kind of this strange paradox. How do you navigate this, and how do you feel about it as a mother?
There's a joke that my father-in-law told me, which was that, men decide what jobs to take, and they vote, they make a lot of political decisions, but women decide what products to buy, how many children to have, how to raise the children, how to run the household. And so if you look at some traditional societies, women and men have their domains and there's status in those domains. When women are seeking out status in the wider world instead of within their homes, then they're seeking out status in a domain that is obviously important, but we've ascribed more importance to the outside of the home domain of status than a more domestic sphere. And so, yeah, certainly I call prolactin an anti-feminist hormone, because when you're breastfeeding, it makes you extremely devoted and extremely caring towards your child. And it also kills your libido, kills your desire for status. I don't want to argue on Twitter. I don't even read my notifications anymore. That would be unheard a few years ago, whereas pregnancy doesn't change you that much. So I came to motherhood much later in life than most people. And so I had a long run up of that status seeking, getting a PhD, trying to, win in the academic game. And then actually now all of that seems to pale in importance so much. And it's very difficult before you have a child. It's something they call a vampire problem, right? Mm. If you're thinking about whether or not to become a vampire, you don't know what kind of preferences you're going to have. You're going to want to drink blood. You're going to want to stay up all night. That's kind of weird. Whereas being a mother is also a kind of vampire problem. You become a somewhat different person with different preferences. She's essentially
Explaining the phenomenon where women have a tendency to become more conservative after children.
And so it's not I'm completely unfamiliar to myself, but I am quite different, and I have quite different preferences than I did before. And all of what I built beforehand still seems important, but I wouldn't be as motivated now to engage in everything I did before.
Do you have something to say? Mary's laughing.
Diana's funny. I'm laughing. I've always got something to say, Bridget. It worked. It kind of went the other way for me, in the sense that I accidentally became a writer after I became a mother. I never experienced having my career derailed by having kids, because I didn't have one. I was terrible at everything I did in my entire professional life, all the way up to when I had a child at the age of 38. I sucked at everything I did. And so when I became a stay-at-home mum, I was like, actually, this is really nice. This is much nicer than what I was doing before. I'm my own boss. And then I became a writer sort of by accident. When my daughter got a little bit older and I had a bit more time, I was like, what am I going to do? And here we are. So I suppose my reflection, listening to you guys and thinking about sort of how we grapple with this question, is it's real. Like there are zero-sum conflicts between being out there in the world and being at home with your baby. This is obvious. You're pumping. I miss my family already. I mean, she's 7. She's not even a baby. I still miss her. She's at home. And there are zero-sum conflicts. You can't simultaneously be at a conference and also at school sports day. But
that is the first time I've ever heard a feminist acknowledge that. It is almost always the opposite, that there's no such thing as a zero sum.
I think somebody very wise once said, you can have it all, just not all at once.
Yes.
And I think that's probably something to hang on to. Life is actually very long. And I don't think it's necessarily self-evident that women who want to be mothers have to do everything in the same order as a man would, who was planning a professional career. I mean, for example, a great many of the women I know have had 3 careers, not 1, 3. They did they had one occupation up to the point where they had kids, where they were independent and living more or less a not dissimilar lifestyle to a single man. And then they maybe dialed that back or did something different or just voluntary work while their kids were young. And then after their kids were grown up or mostly independent, I know a lot of women who retrained somewhere at a sort of perimenopausal age and older and took on a kind of matriarch role. And a lot of those are quite serious, I would say quite spiritual occupations, becoming therapists or ministers of ministry of some kind is quite common. And I see this as a sort of threefold career path, which actually seems to work, or it seems to emerge organically for quite a lot of women who are mothers. And I think, perhaps we could borrow that as a sort of maiden mother matriarch template for what women's life trajectories could look like, and try and tell a positive story about how we do it, how we can have it all, just not all at once, and perhaps just follow a slightly different path.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What messages do you think young girls are getting about feminism?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, I think they're getting very confusing messages. Feminism has just become this absolute mess of a set of ideas that don't fit together. Feminism is now there for everybody. It's wrapped up with notions of kindness that, second wave feminists would have kicked out ages ago for playing on stereotypes. And so I don't really think that they understand I wouldn't blame them for rejecting feminism, given that the set of ideas that they're being presented with are so completely incoherent. And at the same time, you can see that the effects of the kind of modern instantiation of feminism is, I would say, really very detrimental to them, because it's telling them all sorts of extra things, extra incoherent things about their bodies, how they can solve their problems through changing their bodies, stuff that just, again, the second wave just would have made no sense whatsoever. So I think that's a real shame. So we just have to, I just want to say as well that I'm one of those mothers that did not experience breastfeeding the way that everyone else seems to have done here. And I did not find it the most fulfilling period of my life and longed to stay at home. I desperately wanted to get out. So I am the person that you all despise in that respect. But
No.
But I can see that the problem is that people think there's only one kind of feminism. As Mary said, there's plenty of resources in the second wave to focus on biology, to focus on the ethics of care, to focus on the ways in which female bodies are different and which mother-child bonds are special, and how we could change society to support those better. That would all be completely compatible with feminism. It's just so widely defined.
You know what I don't hear feminism talk about ever? And I know there's men that deal with this too, but just for the sake of keeping it simple, is that because of the stereotypes that women are the nurturers and whatnot, we often get stuck with the burden of having to care for old parents, which derails your life significantly. Significantly. So something to think about. That it's not even just what are they supposed to do? It's they have to pick something, right? It's well, it's not that easy. But aside from that, when you want to put off having kids until you're older, that gets reinforced. So then when those kids grow up, they're going to have to take care of you during their times. It's a never ending cycle. Does it make sense?
We can argue about all that. So to say that feminism is responsible for X, yeah, a version of it is. Clearly a terrible version of it is. But as the anti-feminism backlash grows, I think it's important to specify that there's not just one set of ideas. 51% of the population are talking about this, so how could there possibly be one set of ideas here? Anyway.
Anna, do you have any thoughts on motherhood, or I also want to know what you think about the messaging that young girls are getting.
I guess I can answer both, kill two birds with one stone. I think the content of the messaging is less important than the kind of package that it comes in. So people tend to, with these kind of progressive luxury boutique beliefs, people tend to separate what happens to them in real life and what they observe with their own eyes from the overall messaging. And you see all the ladies on this dais are obviously pretty late mothers, I'm guessing. So that is something that affects us personally in our daily lives, but it's also something that has a tremendous effect in aggregate on things like the birth rate, the fertility rate, and that sort of thing. And with young women, I think there has been, it's a positive, optimistic thing that a lot of young women are turning their backs on this kind of mainstream liberal feminism that's been responsible for so much damage to society. But on the other hand, when you observe young women talking, it almost feels like they are aping, parroting these received ideas that they don't necessarily even believe in or subscribe to. I don't know if you guys caught on Twitter the bear versus man discourse.
I listened to this. I was did I get this far? Oh, she explains it so well.
Some woman made a poll about how, like, if you're alone in the woods and you are, you know, walking around, would you rather encounter a man or a bear? And so many women overwhelmingly got in line to say, well, the bear, because the bear is a predictable organism, whereas men are dangerous and volatile and unpredictable and may rape you or worse. And a lot of male critics, specifically on the right, took this as a sign that women were completely like deranged and delusional and irrational, and their views on women were suddenly proven right. But of course,
But do you notice how they all were laughing when she was explaining it? It's like, so there we go, viewing men as one, stupid, and that it's just a girl joke, and then when she gets to the point, they're still laughing, which then reinforces, because she was saying, like, the right will say this reinforces the idea that women are delusional, but it's like it's also reinforcing the idea that men are stupid. So it's just like not good.
tend to see feminism also as like a signaling mechanism. It is a set of beliefs that's also meant in a way to alienate, provoke, also sexually irritate the opposite sex into taking a firm stance. Another good Twitter example recently was Jordan Peterson clapping back, quote, tweeting Richard Hanania about the pro-Palestine protesters on American campuses and how you cannot find like a single cis white hetero male among them and how they're all women. And I think Peterson said something like, well, they're all harpies crying out for a firm hand. Yeah. And that was his like extreme brand of trolling. But there's some truth to it that a lot of what we call feminism in terms of like the public propaganda, the public lip service, is a provocation.
Can I propose that we call that magazine feminism? It's like the idiotic reductive version of received a set of received opinions as a signaling mechanism, as you describe it. If we specify that that's magazine feminism, which is,
I guess she's not wrong. Like it's like YouTube thumbnails. It's just rage bait.
I think, an enemy to probably all of us here, as distinct from the more from the subtler.
Rage bait implies that like the person that puts the content out is trying to like grift off of people being mad about something. It's like a little bit different. I think some of the people actually believe this shit.
Or far-reaching critiques that you might find in a actually properly written book. The simplified version that circulates in memes, meme feminism or magazine feminism.
Meme feminism.
In other words, I should test. I'm done. Yes, that would have been fucking perfect.
It's a thing, and I think it's a destructive thing.
Everybody failed.
By and large.
Yeah, the backlash is interesting to feminism. And now it's taken on, it's like the bogeyman that takes on, it's blamed for everything. And we all live in the longhouse, I guess. Do you think we live in the longhouse?
Please, you're going to have to define that for me first.
I mean, I don't even know if I could still define it. Is it like harpies the vaginocracy took over the world and now we all live under submission?
Girl code right now. Hold up. Did you guys notice that Louise Perry is not on this panel? What date was this? Like, girl code says she pissed somebody off because Louise Perry would be like the first one. You know what I mean? Uh-oh. Do they have beef?
Of harpy women who are older and have dried up
live
ovaries.
Under the suffocating underskirts of the devouring den mother.
Devouring mother.
And who's enveloped us somehow in her terrifying, suffocating flesh, and now we can't speak or move or do anything vital or adventurous. That's the theme, I think. These are not my opinions. Just for the Kathleen, just for the avoidance of doubt, these are not my opinions. I'm paraphrasing a prevailing, the countervailing meme, if you like.
Right.
That says this is the reality we live in. I mean, to be honest, I recognise the critique. The cartoon figure that I think characterises it most powerfully is Mother Gothel. in the Disney movie of Rapunzel, Tangled, who keeps Rapunzel trapped in the tower so she can consume her life force, as it were, and terrifies her into being unwilling to leave. I mean, I actually think that my main complaint about the movie Tangled is that it underestimates the psychologically warping effects of being kept constrained like that. Because I mean, Rapunzel seems pretty well adjusted for having been imprisoned in a tower by somebody who's consuming her life force. You'd have thought she'd be a lot crazier and a lot more mentally disturbed. But I mean, this is a Disney movie, so like, I can't be too critical. But Mother Gothel, I think, as a metaphorical force, I think I sort of feel like the spirit of Mother Gothel was with us all the way through lockdowns, for example. And consuming the life force of all of our children, many of whom now have severe, ongoing, persistent mental health issues as a result of safety measures which were imposed not primarily for their benefit, but for the Mother Gothels of this world, who were the ones who needed that vitality. I mean, this is something that, I mean, we're some distance now from even magazine feminism, but I think the quote-unquote Longhouse critique, which for people who are not ridiculously unnecessarily online, emerges from niche corners of the internet right, and is essentially a criticization of it criticizes the feminization of public life and the feminization of our ways of living together. I don't think is fundamentally driven by women, or not only by women. I think it's as much an effect of technology just very simply making life easier for us all across the board.
I have a question for all of you about that, because how much of this realistically is an ideological phenomenon and how much of it is a technological phenomenon? And from my observation, a lot of progressive activism as a whole tends to follow suit and basically march in lockstep with technological processes and revolutions that it claims to contest.
Yep. Yeah, I completely. I mean, my account of the history of feminism has always been that you can read it as ideological, but you can also read it from the other end of the telescope as a byproduct of material changes and technological innovation. In that a great deal of the very first wave of feminism back in the 18th and 19th centuries was a byproduct of concrete material changes in how men and women lived together as a downstream of the Industrial Revolution, particularly around work leaving the home and becoming something that happened elsewhere, which introduced a whole new set of conflicts for women. And I'm not going to go wang on about that, because that's a very long piece of history. But I think if you look at it from that sort of materialist perspective, it makes it easier to think about what we're seeing without either pointing the finger at one sex or the other, or else assuming that we can change it all just by changing our ideas.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that way of looking at it, but then I wonder why we think we can change anything. I mean, it sounds a bit quietist, like...
Oh, finally, some sense. Does this mean they're adopting a deterministic lens, or what?
We are products of our liberal heritage, the technological heritage. I definitely am not going back. You cannot take me back. And I'm a gay woman. There'd be no place for me in a trad society. So is there anyone on the panel that has aspirations for some kind of more traditional setup or thinks it's possible?
Well, no, I completely take your point, but I think, in a sense, what technologies we embrace and how and why. You don't have to be quietist and just assume that technology and innovation is necessarily going to happen just in and of itself, regardless of what we want to do about it. It's not a self-directing force. It's a set of choices that we make individually and collectively. And I think we can think concretely about how we want to.
Sean. Bold of her to assume she has a choice or input on this matter. That's what I'm saying. It's like, what's the point? Like, I get it, but it's just like, how many times of fucking up are you gonna realize, maybe it's something we can't control? just an idea. Not to say that we don't put constraints or something like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's like, how many decades are people going to have to like bear the burden of like the wrong thing?
We want to innovate into the future, for example. We could think about, do we want technologies which carry on making us even freer than we are already, for example? Or would it...
I say develop the artificial wombs. Thank you. The only way I see a solution to the issues we're facing right now is if somehow we created a fast track version of pregnancy, which sounds crazy. I'm an alien, but I'm just saying, like, I think one of the biggest, I don't want to say burdens, but I mean, like, it's like one way to look at it. When you're growing up, what are we? We're the, like, millennials. So we had a period where we had technology, but it wasn't so pervasive. But everybody that comes after us, it's more pervasive. And it's like, if you're growing up where you can get every single one of your issues customized to, like, get it tomorrow, prime, if you will, it's like, what makes you think that these people are primed to even do something like pregnancy? And then the outcome isn't even like the guy will stay with you. Like, there's always the threat, you know what I mean? But if we were able to, like, I know this sounds crazy. I'm not, like, it's obviously not doable. It's just something to think about. It's like, if we could eliminate the pregnancy portion, the 9 months, the worst health effects after you give birth, the body changes, the mental health risks, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, all of that stuff. It's like, it probably would become something that's, I feel like people would be popping out kids all the time. But is that smart? I don't know. No, probably not. And it sounds so crazy and so selfish, but it's like, is it selfish because it sounds so technological? Because really, what's selfish is assuming that somebody should take the burden for you. Crazy. I don't know. But there's so much good that comes from that long process, right? But I don't think it's the same good for the man. And how could it be? He's not the one carrying the child. And that's not fair. So I feel like in the courts and stuff, women already have an upper hand because they carried it. But what if you made that even? You know, just an idea, just to get us thinking.
Make more sense to try and
And I'm talking beyond surrogacy. Like surrogacy, like, yeah, that's kind of it in a sense, but no, I'm talking like for everybody. They don't have to deal with pregnancy. And actually, I predicted that this would be a thing in the next 10 years. So, although it sounds crazy, is it?
our technology is more towards human nature. I mean, this is something that you and I, Diana, sometimes agree on and sometimes disagree on. Diana is very much more bullish on human augmentation, I think, than I am.
Yeah. So
but my sense is that you and I actually have some common ground on human nature being at least a thing, which magazine feminism, if you like, doesn't.
Yeah. So there's this idea that, you know, you can always say that any philosophy has a sort of slippery slope. Any philosophy can be taken too far. And you could say that with feminism, if you want to equalize the labor between men and women, that eventually you also want to emancipate women from pregnancy and from breastfeeding, right? And on the one hand, yes, I can see why artificial wombs might be something important. I don't think surrogacy is as bad as you do. In fact, surrogates have lower rates of postpartum depression because they're chosen for their psychological fortitude, whereas women who have their children
yeah, but it's kind of slavery. I know they're getting paid, but it's like, what if one person gets paid more than the other? Like, it gets so wrong so quickly. Imagine the human rights lawsuits. Like, what if they decide they change their mind? It's like they grew it. You know, it's like, no, we paid for a certain ooh. It's like really creepy.
purpose are not chosen for their psychological fortitude.
I mean, except when they're trafficked for surrogacy, as has happened already in England. There have been arrests for that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it here in the United States. Surrogates are generally paid very well, and there's not surrogacy trafficking. But you could say that women should be emancipated from pregnancy. But on the other hand, yes, human nature is a thing, and you recognize that you might be able to decouple, you know, the physiological effects of pregnancy and childbearing from the psychology, but you still might have the same desires that you always had. And so I think that we might overestimate you might say, okay, well, if I'm not carrying a pregnancy, if I'm using an artificial womb, will I be able to attach to my child? There's this, I'll just talk about Chesterton's fence. There's this idea in conservatism, you move
Artificial wombs create soldiers too. Yeah, Mel. Sure does. Sure does. That's what I'm saying.
to a new property, there's a fence there, and you don't know what it's for, so you tear it down. And that's called Chesterton's fence. And there's all kinds of sex roles and ideas about male and female roles that we have done away with, actually not knowing what they were for. We didn't see what these traditions were for.
Feminism, we're covering this again. LOL, this whole space seems to be stuck on this subject and yet get none of it right. This is our favorite thing. You know how many refreshes I have just to find somebody that has a debate on this stuff? The last one we did, I think, was February last year. I love this shit. Kind of
and given that women are getting more mentally ill and more depressed.
Oh no.
Especially progressive women are getting more depressed and more mentally ill. It doesn't seem like, if you just look at an outcome of well-being, it doesn't really seem to be working.
I mean, I think like the conservative philosophy in a nutshell is like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which has its problems. But the progressive, like the leftist philosophy is like, if it ain't broke, let's tear it down anyway and see what happens.
What could go wrong?
And that seems to me much more kind of frightening and dangerous, especially where things like women's issues are concerned. I mean, if you talk about like, I have actually really no thought out opinion on surrogacy. I instinctively, my feminine intuition says it's bad, but I can't tell you why.
But not the feminine intuition. No. It's good on a small scale, right? Because it gives some people, like, I don't want to have kids, but if I had a surrogacy, I'd probably do it because, like, my family, we're so prone to psychosis, and I'm vulnerable at this point. So it's like, I would rather not have that, you know? But then so many other things can come from it. What if people just want surrogacy because they don't want to carry the child? It's like if everybody's doing that at large, and I'm talking carrying it for like, they just don't want to ruin their bodies. Like internally is one thing, but like externally, it's like another thing. What if they banned plastic surgery? Fuck. I'm just kidding. But it's like, there's so many other things that come from it.
But on the other hand, decoupling like pregnancy from even the negative physiological effects, I say, like, why would you even want that? That makes you just less human as a whole.
Yeah. True.
Oh, I'm not in favor of bad human things happening. Like you could say, I mean, it's very easy to make a natural argument, but it's hard to figure out where that stops, right?
Yeah.
Is it natural to have the flu or chicken pox or to prolapse? You know, those things are all also natural, right?
Prolapsing,
but it's not. This is the same argument in favor of transhumanism. Like Mary's quite anti-transhumanism, I'm quite pro-transhumanism.
Right,
yeah. In that I think that we should abolish death, and I think that we should abolish all human suffering where possible. But I do.
Oh, come on. So we're going to raise Karens? Please. Please. Anytime people are like, I don't want to bring a child into this world, it's just so horrible. I'm like, so you want to raise a Karen? I want my child to have some hardships, you know? Builds character, the fuck?
Agree that it's difficult to figure out how to abolish certain forms of suffering without increasing human suffering
like
in other ways.
What the watershed is like, I think like Ivan Illich put it this way in his writings about like medicine and health, right? That there's a watershed moment where positive developments begin to cause more harm than good. And I think like as humans, we historically have not been good at predicting those.
To be clear, it's not so much that I'm anti-transhumanist as that I don't think it's possible to be transhumanist. I mean, I think it's not really up to me whether people try and defeat death or graft tails to themselves or whatever. And I dare say that there are people already out there trying.
I hope to hold tails with you someday, Mary.
Wait, did the audio just go wonky? It's a sign. What the fuck? That got weird. Hold on, let me check that. It's like that on the real one. Okay, I think it does that. Okay, let's just skip it a little bit.
Just
It
thought I'd throw
depends how
that.
anti-universalist
There we
you want
go.
to be, Kathleen. I think.
Say again?
How anti-universalist do you want to be? I think
How
that's the
What
question,
wild
really.
How universalist?
How anti-universalist
Oh, I'm
do you
very
want to be?
anti-universalist.
In
I'm
which
very
case, you just have to leave them being stoned to death, don't you, logically?
Yeah, I
Oh
don't
my
know. I mean, I
God.
think that I think feminism should be doing well-being, and well-being at the very least requires like some degree of autonomy, food, light, heat. Let's just start at the basics rather than fiddling around with like whether we can take away this little thing from our experience to make us happier. You know, basically they're
Pretty much saying like, fuck you utilitarians and your crazy maximize. I'm just kidding.
women that just don't have enough to eat because the men are stealing it. You know, that stuff.
They're probably not wrong. I'm just kidding. I don't think my dad has ever taken the last slice without asking, you know? What the hell?
I mean, to take a cynical, to take the cynical side in this, I think if you are of the missionary ilk, and I want to preface this by saying that I think like all of us on the panel and probably in this room agree that we should like not go back to the way things were. I don't think anybody wants that, but I mean,
It doesn't matter. We can't. Okay. We can't. Been saying it forever. You cannot go backwards. It just doesn't work that way. If it did. Actually, could you imagine if, like, genetically we would go backwards? What would that look like? Whoa.
I think the only way that you spread feminism across the globe is literally through like regime change, which would be racist and Islamophobic. So we can't do that.
That's like one way to look at
Yeah,
it.
I think that if I had been forced, you know, my parents wanted me to marry my first boyfriend when I was whatever 19, 20 years old and have babies with him, and I didn't, and I was, you know, just sledding around and going to conferences and having a great time for like 20 years, and then I settled down and had a child, and now I'm evangelizing for this thing that it took me ages to decide to do. So I mean, if I'm cynical about myself, it's that I came to these ideas, you know, through the freedom that feminism afforded me, and if it had been foisted on me, I might not have been such an avid.
I've been saying this for so many, oh my God, guys, how many times do I say, it's like women want you to like give her a little job. Okay. We don't want you to force us to give us the job. We just want to figure out later that we want to stay home. It's like, no, she's literally emphasizing it. Stop it. We just want to feel like we have the choice. Thanks.
Adopter.
This is a perfect example of what I mean about learning the hard way, that human nature is the way it is for a reason.
It's like the men of the world are our boyfriends, just like, oh my God, we can't give them parental leave. No, we're putting our foot down. It's like if your every biological cell in your body is saying stay home with the baby, it's like that we got to throw in some extra payment. These bitches.
Yeah.
Love you.
Yeah, I had that essay, I Regret Being a Slut, that went huge, and I still get responses
yeah,
to
I
this.
forgot about
And
that.
it's been, I have heard a lot of thoughts from Diana, different people who have felt like maybe it was just me kind of looking back on my life and I enjoyed it at the time, but now I didn't, whatever they want to say about it. But the response from women and gay men, actually, lots of gay men have written me about it too, was really overwhelming. And I do wonder if this is like a downstream consequence of all of the freedom we have, although I don't know how to, you know, obviously personal responsibility. I don't know what the solution is to that.
We need more people writing books on how having freedom of choice is not it. Maybe I should write a book on this. The illusion of choice. I mean, there's already stuff on this. MGTOW knows what's up. It's like, if there were algorithms or formulas that determined, hey, this is going to be your best outcome based on this, kind of like an aptitude test, which sounds insane, but it's like when you really like having too much choice and too many outcomes, is probably really stressful for most people. And I don't mean to say woe is women, but like knowing that women have that biological clock too, like no wonder they're more mentally ill. With love, okay? I'm here too, bitch.
Yeah, so there's this book by Louise Perry that some of you might know. It's called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. It's been a bit of a touchstone. And I read it, and it had a big effect on me because I realized that I am different than other women. And many feminists are different from other women. So I am higher on sociosexuality, which is a sciencey way of saying I'm sluttier than other women are. And I am more independent. I'm more assertive. I'm less agreeable. I'm just kind of a spiky masculinized psychology overall. And I realized that when feminists are going out in the world, they're often endorsing values that they hold that are not endorsed by the mainstream of women because men and women are so psychologically different. And even if the culture is very gently saying casual sex and hookup culture is good, because women are somewhat more agreeable than men are, they're more likely to go with the flow. And so maybe I don't think that we should necessarily bring back slut shaming, although that's what I was joking around about with when I've talked to Louise. I think it might be a good idea to tell women, you know, you might not find hookup culture or having casual sex very fulfilling, and you might find situationships uniquely frustrating compared to the kinds of empowering messages you get about casual sex from the mainstream culture and from music and pop culture.
But yeah,
I feel like empowerment comes from power. And so when you tell them after the fact, after they hoe it out, it's like it's really not going to do much, which is why me, amongst other women, talk about the power that comes with your V card, baby. Well, that shouldn't be the right thing. Well, the fact of the matter is it just is, okay? We can try to pretend that we can change our disgust or like our disgust mechanisms to be anything other than that, but we all know that's not working. We're all playing in this little like dull game, and it's like nobody's really honest. I feel like you get, it's like if everybody could just have no choice but to be like, this is what I'm saying versus this is how I live, and you could see like how much transparency there is. It's like maybe it'd be different, but anytime you try to say anything against the narrative, they'll be like, but not all women, some of us like to hoe it out. And it's like, do you actually like to hoe it out, sis? Are you just pretending you like to? And I know that sounds like really lame, but it's like, why is it that women just defend so? There's a couple things women defend shit for. Being a hoe has to be top of the list. For who? For who, bitch? For who? You gotta capitalize on it until what? Until your soul, like until you have to repent. That's embarrassing. Like really? I don't know. It's just like, it's just funny to think that we even think we have the choice.
I think too the problem is then the other side of this is you get these like Andrew Tate misogynists who kind of come out of the reaction to something like me saying I regret being a slut, and they're like, see, the longhouse,
right?
Like we were right. Feminism is so. It's weird because I don't want to encourage and embolden that either.
Yeah, that.
Mary, what do you think?
I think one of the difficulties that we have is a much broader cultural one, which is that it's become culturally incredibly difficult to talk normatively without somebody yelling at you.
Yeah,
you know, it's incredibly difficult to say. Well, people are usually
sorry, it was me.
Like this, because somebody will stand up and look back, no, I'm not. And that always happens. And you're like, well,
I feel like that's literally what I just said. It makes me believe we're more in a simulation anytime shit like this happens, because I didn't get this far. Oh, just kidding.
So what? Like the average, on that, do you not understand averages? No. And you just end up having that conversation again and again.
You know what else is something interesting that I've taken note of is like think about our mothers and how much they were honest in saying don't have kids. Okay, not all of them, but a large proportion of them, if you think about it, like the 60s was sexual liberation, if you will. And it almost seems like we've normalized being open and talking about these ideas, but not enough to hear what their mothers really thought about it. So you're just getting that one side of the story. And then when you try to do the opposite, you're getting similar outcomes. And it's like, why can't we just be honest and be like, once you have kids, your life kind of sucks. Like, and it's like, but what would happen in the reverse? You can't predict it. So anytime they talk about it, it's just like they think that because it brings them so much stress or sadness, that doing the opposite would have been better. And that's just not true. I feel bad for moms that think this way. And I actually came across a video on TikTok because, you know, my algorithm's like, should I have kids? You know, we're like trying to stress about it. Love it. And there was a girl that was like, I asked my therapist, how do you know if you should have kids? And it was like, she told her to think of 3 instances, and I was like, wow, I never heard that. And that was so well said. And it was something, I can play it some other day, but it was something like, imagine that things get really hard. What are you going to do when those things get hard? Whether that's like you don't have extra help. It's just like, how are you going to deal with the conflict of it being overwhelmingly hard? Do you have somebody to reach out to, support? So like something to think about. And then another thing was like, what was it? It was something, I forget. Fuck. It was really good though. Maybe I can find it right now. Hold on.
Again, and whereas everybody with eyes can still see that averages are what they are, and actually stereotype accuracy, I believe Diana will be able to tell me, is one of the most well replicated results in psychology. Yeah. That what people notice, the patterns people notice about how humans are broadly accurate, even if such as Diana, there are exceptions. Yeah, you know, there are more sociosexual women. On average, women are less sociosexual than men, for example. There are countless other patterns. I'm not going to try and list them all. I'll probably get into trouble if I do, because of this cultural issue that we have, whereas it's just not possible.
Okay, so she said becoming a mother is a very universal path, but the individual journey and experience is so unique to every single mom, that you're going to see moms who are on YouTube and Instagram saying one thing, and then I think she says the opposite. Like, are you aware that being a mom is probably one of the most unstable, unpredictable, craziest journeys that you will ever do in your life? So it might be easy, might be hard. It's really unpredictable, unstable. Is that something you're okay with? For me, I was like, yeah, that's doable. But I know so many women that are like control freaks. Bridezillas. There's some women that would be horrible mothers. No offense. Okay. Just. Is there any scenario in which you're okay with that insaneness? It's like my whole life is chaotic. Sprinkle a little baby. We could have fun. Okay, and then 2 is, what are you going to do if it gets hard? Which is like what I was saying earlier. And then what's the third one? If anything hits the wall, finances, whatever. She's just going on that. Are you going to be able to get through it? Are you going to be able to find the tools and support that you need? Yeah. Ask for help. I'm like so used to asking for help, but I know if you would have asked me years ago, I'd be like totally up with those covert contracts, like huffing and puffing around my husband until he got the fucking hint. But now I just ask ahead of time, or I just don't do, and then they pick up on it, which is horrible. I try to be conscious of it. I'm impulsive, y'all. I feel like 3 was a little personalized. Running sucks, and running is really hard. But running a marathon and finishing a marathon will give you a sense of pride and empowerment that nobody can take away from you. There's something about training for a marathon, running a marathon with people around you. You guys are all on this hard journey together that's cheering. You get a medal or whatever. You cross the finish line. You just do the really hard thing. You get it done. And it will give you a sense of empowerment and accomplishment. It's very indescribable. And what she was trying to tell me at the time. Okay, then she goes in. Okay, does it make sense? I feel like that was valuable. Sorry, it was so choppy.
Possible to talk about the norms. But I think where it comes to sexual behavior and sexual preferences for women, there are, and for men, there are clear differences. Louise set them out superbly in her book. I recommend any of you that hasn't read it should read it. It's a great book. And we ought to be able to speak normatively about those differences and the inference, what follows really from being able to talk about the normative differences between men and women on some of these axes is actually that not...
I feel like Steve, yes. I feel like the family influencers are exploiting their kids. I feel like when I look at the family influencers, I can't help but think the moms are narcissists. And maybe I can understand that maybe I'm fucking projecting. Okay. But I am an influencer and I could never fucking imagine putting my child on, as much as I would love to be like, look, I made it. Like, there's nothing I want more than to show my medal. I made this thing, you know, but it's like, there's something wrong with you. Is there not? Like, how can you do that? Like, I get it. But I guess it's because, well, I don't get it. I think it's insane. I think it is insane. There's got to be laws. I think they only passed one recently based on that whole family. Do you guys remember like 2 years ago how they returned their baby who was adopted? It's like they just had an adopted baby because they were doing a good deed. Communal narcissists, if you will. Okay, I understand this is a faulty in my thinking, but you can't show me one parent or family channel that is not exploiting those kids. You can make a case for it if it was somehow put into one of those bank accounts that like child stars stuff goes in. I don't know if it's even like universal, but there's something where like you cannot touch the money. But even then I feel like, you know, I don't know, something's off. Something's off. As much as I would be like, look, it's my thing. I made that. Like it's my egg. Like,
all sexual double standards are bad, which is a provocative statement to make from the vantage point of pretty much all magazine feminism, which will declare that all sexual double standards, no matter what, are bad and should be abolished because that's just because any differentiation between the sexes in terms of roles, behaviours, norms, or anything is automatically sexist. It's stereotyping. It's bad. It should be gone. But as it turns out, once you get rid of them all, it actually makes things worse for a large proportion of women. It doesn't make it better; it makes it worse. And so I think we should be able to push back on that. We should be able to push back in favour of normativity in women's interests, and it should not be beyond the wit of man or woman to do that in a way which still leaves space for those among us who might be a little bit more unusual.
Yeah, and I realize, you know, when I was talking to my feminist friends,
come to think of it, any parent, because here's the thing that happens. I don't know, I'm running through ideas. Hold on. If you are going to exploit your child on YouTube and you're the person in charge of upholding your child's rights, think of it in terms of like capacity. Can your 2-year-old go to a plastic surgeon, be like, I want to fix my nose? It's like, not really. No. But if you do something that takes that choice away from them that will affect them long term, something like public scrutiny, should you be in charge of their rights at all? Like, you can't. How is it in the best interest of the kid, especially when they're divorced? What if like the dad's like, hey, I don't want to put them on there, and then it's like all the issues that come when you just put children on the dark side. It's like there's too big of a case to say this isn't in the best interest. You know what's in best interest? You can go on YouTube. Why you got to bring your kid? Nothing says they're an accessory, like 8 kids and counting. It's like they're dehumanized in a way. It's like, no, they see our dated. No, there's something off. Could you imagine being on YouTube and having all your bullying or like the shit that made you cry and run in a closet be just blasted to the internet? It's like maybe there could be a case for people being like, oh, it's okay. It's just the time of school. Like nice people, but it's fucking ruthless. I don't know. Like I'd rather not, I don't know.
Versus talking to women who are more mainstream, which I now do know women who are more normal because I'm a mother and I talk with other mothers. I didn't realize that I was a slutty, disagreeable woman, thinking that everybody else was also slutty and disagreeable, and not realizing that actually the average woman is quite different than I am. And it takes a long time to figure that out when you're insulated from more normal culture, when you're hanging around with academics who are quite different than other people.
Yeah, we're all not like the other girls here.
Pick me!
It's a panel of pick-me's. But no, I mean, obviously the problem with like having any sort of like sexual free-for-all like we have, there a lot of critics on the right especially complain about how we live in like this kind of hedonistic, over-sexualized, pornified culture. But the reality, the effect of it is that it's a completely sterile and sexless culture. It's not sexy. And I think that that's the big problem when you get rid of all the kind of rules and guidelines and nothing is transgressive anymore. But I guess my question also would be, how do you go back to establishing some kind of normative standard without going around and lecturing and scolding? Because you notice that, again,
don't have sex. You might get pregnant and die. Mean Girls.
Both camps, men and women, have become increasingly more bitter and hysterical. So you have these like right-wing anonymous types who hate women and think they're sluts and blah, blah, blah. And then you have this like post-feminist school that is coming to feminism from a vaguely like center-right, post-left angle. And what I see there a lot, because initially I was like, oh, this is a breath of fresh air, finally some feminists that are willing to speak the truth about like gender roles. What I find is a lot of like haranguing and moral scolding again of young men and young women, because God forbid someone else out there is having fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
but it's like, why make a rule, or like, why make that the normative when you know it harms more people? I hate to say that, but should you make a rule based on the people that want to go the extra mile? What I'm trying to say is, like, if we know that casual sex harms more women in some regard than the other, why are we trying to make the line there? Like, it'd be better to put the line on some, well, maybe I'm just insane, like ban this altogether, do it only for this. And then like you have the people that are hoeing out a little bit. It's like, why can't they take I don't know, the repercussions. Because right now it's like allowed a couple people, men and women, to hoe out and let everybody else suffer. It's like, I don't like that. It stresses me out. Okay, we're gonna end it here. We're gonna finish the rest of it coming back. Like the video, comment, subscribe. If you think I'm insane, put it in the comments below.